Indian tribe became participants in the Starlink beta program. Became participants in the Starlink beta program in Washington State. Located in Whatcom County in Washington State, did not have the infrastructure to deliver high-speed internet. The Nooksack Tribal Council is providing more than 100 households in their community with Starlink service who had been negatively impacted by not having internet during the pandemic. These families began to receive service last month and are now able to use the internet for work, school, and even access telemedicine. In other exciting news, last week we announced the 4-person crew who will be the first private citizens to fly on board Dragon. We'll share these new details for the Inspiration 4 mission a bit later in the webcast. Now we're currently at T-minus 11 minutes and 45 seconds from liftoff of our next batch of Starlink satellites. So with that, let's take a closer look at the rocket on your screen.
I'm Yomezo, a Dragon propulsion engineer here at SpaceX, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it sits on our launch pad 40 at Cape Canaveral, Florida. Our 2-stage launch vehicle stands about 70 meters tall, and when it's fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant, and the vehicle will burn through this in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. We prepped Falcon 9 for launch in our hangar at the base of the pad, and upon completing final checkouts, Falcon 9 rolled out to the pad with the Starlink payload and went vertical earlier this morning around 1:40 a.m. Eastern Time. The bottom 2/3 of the vehicle you see there is the first stage. It previously flew 6 times, having supported the launch of NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to the International Space Station, Anasis-2, CRS-21, Transporter-1, and 2 previous Starlink missions, the most recent of which was less than a month ago. The objective of the first stage is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to space and then separate from the rest of the rocket. Once the first stage separates from the second stage, it'll make its way back down to Earth and target a landing on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. To give you some perspective, our drone ships are equivalent in size to a football field, and the landing area that you see right there is approximately 200 feet by 150 feet. That's big enough that a hockey rink would fit inside that landing area of the drone ship. If successful, today's landing will mark the 79th recovery of an orbital class rocket. Above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine, which ignites after the first stage separates. At full power, the Merlin vacuum engine operates with the greatest efficiency ever for an American-made hydrocarbon rocket engine. The second stage is what will carry our Starlink satellites to orbit. At the very top of the rocket there is a large nose cone, and this is called the fairing. Made of a carbon composite material, the fairing protects satellites on their way to orbit and is jettisoned approximately 3 minutes into flight. Just like our first stage, today we will be using a flight-proven fairing and will be attempting to recover each half again with a contracted recovery vessel named Sheila Bordelon. Reusability is critical to what we do here at SpaceX, and it allows SpaceX to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives down the cost of space access. At just under T-minus 9 minutes, let's take a look at how we're progressing in the countdown.
The chief engineer held a technical poll at T-minus 1 hour, and the launch director held a propellant load and launch go-no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes. Falcon 9 has been loading propellant since T-minus 35 minutes, and our fuel is a refined form of kerosene, which we call RP1. Our oxidizer is a super chilled liquid oxygen called LOX. And to densify the LOX, we chill it well below the boiling point, allowing us to fill the propellant tanks as much as possible. We use the same propellants on both stages, as the second stage is primarily a short version of the first stage, which is one of the many reliability features in the Falcon design. With fuel and oxidizer on hand, we need an ignition source to complete the fire triangle. For this, Falcon 9 uses TTEB, which you'll see at T-minus 2 seconds via the green spark right before the rocket takes off. In addition to RP1 and LOX aboard, Falcon 9 uses helium to keep the tanks pressurized in flight and the propellant flowing correctly into the engines without air bubbles as the propellants deplete. Helium load began before the webcast went live and will continue to be topped off until 1.5 minutes before launch. Very shortly, we will open the pre-valves between the first stage engines and the propellant tanks. And at T-minus 7 minutes, engine chill will begin. This will cool the turbo pumps and avoid thermal shocks when we start the pumps at T-minus 2 seconds to light the Merlin engines. The vehicle is healthy and we're currently working no issues. Range is still green. Weather is looking great, as you can see on your screen. We got some beautiful blue skies over there in Florida. We have a 90% chance of favorable weather for T0. And all systems continue to be go for liftoff at 12:34 p.m. Eastern Time. If for some reason we don't launch today, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 12:12 p.m. Eastern Time.
In February, we announced the world's first all-commercial astronaut mission to orbit, commanded by Jared Isaacman, the 37-year-old founder and chief executive officer of Shift4 Payments, and an accomplished pilot and adventurer. The mission is named after Inspiration 4 because of the four-person crew's mission to inspire support for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital and send a humanitarian message of possibility. Since February, the other three crew members have been selected from the general public, and we are excited to tell you a little bit more about them, their roles, and the mission. Together, this four-person crew represents the pillars and purpose for the Inspiration 4 mission: leadership, hope, prosperity, and generosity, with Jared representing leadership. Haley Arsenault of Memphis, Tennessee will serve as the medical officer overseeing medical care and experiments on the mission and occupy the seat of hope. Haley's selection is particularly poignant for this mission as she is a former cancer patient of St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Now at 29 years old, she has become an inspiration to others at the hospital where she works as a physician's assistant. Dr. Cyan Proctor is a 51-year-old entrepreneur, educator, trained pilot, and active voice in the space exploration community. She was awarded the seat of prosperity after being selected as the top entrant of an independently judged online business competition conducted by the Shift4 Shop e-commerce platform. Dr. Proctor will serve as the mission pilot and back up the commander and support related needs throughout the mission. Christopher Simbrowski is a 41-year-old mechanical fault detection and diagnostics lead at Lockheed Martin and United States Air Force veteran. He was awarded the seat of generosity after contributing to a special fundraising campaign for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Mr. Simbrowski will serve as the mission specialist and help manage payload, science experiments, communications to mission control, and more. Over the coming months, the crew will undergo rigorous commercial astronaut training by SpaceX before their targeted launch date, which is no earlier than September of this year.
We're currently just under 4.5 minutes from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. We're currently waiting for the transporter erector, or the TE, to retract. The TE is that structure next to the vehicle behind the fairing, as you can see there, and the clamps are starting to open up there. Now, after the clamps are fully open, the transporter erector will begin to retract away from the rocket slightly. And then at T0, hydraulics will pull the TE farther away from Falcon 9 to clear the way as the vehicle lifts off. It looks like the clamps are just about finished, and the TE is retracting back. It looks very slight, but it's just enough to move away from the vehicle. And we use the TE to roll the rocket out to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. It also provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing. And it looks like that TE retraction is now complete. The first and second stages are both nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Superchilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer, and when its temperature is increased, it turns from liquid to gas, which is why you see some white clouds around Falcon 9, and that's that liquid oxygen meeting the warmer...
bleed verification.
It's that liquid oxygen meeting that warmer, humid, ambient air.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
And there's that call out that stage 1 LOX loading is now complete. Second stage will wrap up LOX load at T-minus 2 minutes. T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup, and this means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin M1D engines, and we use TTEB, as I mentioned earlier, as our ignition fluid. And when TTEB mixes with oxygen, it burns a green-colored flame, and then we allow the fuel into the thrust chamber, and the engine comes up to full power for liftoff at T0. Now, the Starlink payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is still looking beautiful over there in Cape Canaveral, and the range has cleared the surrounding ground, water, and airspace and are green for launch today. Just waiting for that call out for second stage.
Complete.
Right on time. Stage 2 LOX load is now complete. And with the completion of LOX load, we will start to vent out the LOX line on the transporter erector, so you'll see a lot more of that white cloud that I mentioned earlier. There you can see it on your screen. Again, this is just the liquid oxygen venting out of the LOX line on that transporter erector. And just under 15 seconds or so, Falcon 9 will be in startup, and stage 1 and stage 2 will start to pressurize for launch. Again, the weather looks amazing over there. Some blue skies. Great weather for a launch.
Falcon 9 in startup.
There's that call out that Falcon 9 is now in startup. Now we're just waiting on the final go for launch from the...
Stage 2, press for flight.
Waiting for the final go for launch from the launch director.
Falcon 9 Starlink LDs go for launch.
And there it is. All systems are go for launch.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Now let's listen into the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our stack of Starlink satellites into space.
Stage 1's startup pressures.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Falcon 9 is configured for flight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition and liftoff.
Falcon is pitching downrange.
Stage 1 propulsion nominal.
Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, carrying our stack of Starlink satellites to orbit.
Nominal power and telemetry.
Max Q is the next major event coming up here shortly, which will now be throttling down the engines, the M1D engines on that first stage for. Max Q is the maximum aerodynamic pressure that the vehicle sees on ascent.
Vehicle is supersonic.
And the weather, again, is looking beautiful, clear skies with an amazing view of Falcon on ascent there.
Max Q.
There's that call out that we have passed through Max Q. So in about a minute, we'll have 3 events happening back to back. That'll be main engine cutoff, or MECO, followed by stage separation and SES1, or second engine start 1. Now MECO is where we shut down all 9 of those M1D engines on the first stage that you see burning there on your screen. That's in preparation for the second event, which is stage separation.
MVAC is chilling in.
Just heard that call out that MVAC chillin' has begun. Now stage separation is where the first stage separates from the second stage, and first stage will make its way back to Earth and attempt to land on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, while stage 2 continues on its journey with the third event, second engine start 1. That's where we light up that MVAC engine, and it will propel the second stage along with the Starlink satellites to their targeted drop-off orbit. Just under 20 seconds or so away from those 3 events, that's MECO, stage separation, and SES1. You should be able to see MECO here in a few seconds with those 9 M1D engines shutting down here shortly.
And MECO.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition and throttle up.
And there we've had main engine cutoff and stage separation. You can see that from the ground tracking view there. We did have a good call out of second engine start 1 on the second stage.
Fairing jettison confirmed.
And we heard the call out for fairing deploy. And it looks like we don't have those onboard camera views, but we can still see the first and second stage on your screen there. Now, as a reminder, we will be attempting to recover the fairing halves today with our contracted recovery vessel named Sheila Bordelon.
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
And it does look like fairing separation was good. Now, as stage 2 takes our Starlink satellites to their targeted drop-off orbit, stage 1 will make its way back to Earth by executing 2 burns. The first is the entry burn. That's where 3 of the M1D engines will reignite. This helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. Now, the second burn is the landing burn, and this is the single engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship, and that is that center E9 engine, which is just powerful enough to slow the vehicle down to touch down on that drone ship.
Second stage is following the nominal trajectory.
And we do hear that call out that second stage is looking nominal. Unfortunately, we do not currently have any onboard views of that second stage at the moment, but everything is still looking nominal so far.
If you're just joining us here, we did have a successful liftoff of our Stage 1 from Falcon 9 from
Stage 1
Cape,
FTS is safe.
Cape Canaveral SLS-40, and we're currently Stage 2. We do not have the camera views right now, but we do have confirmation that it is still looking good. Again, our Stage 2 is delivering our Starlink satellites to low Earth orbit. And that's our stack of 60 Starlink satellites.
Entry burn shut down.
Second stage continues to follow the nominal trajectory.
We just heard that call out that Stage 1 entry burn was successful, and there you can see we do have our Stage 2 camera view finally back, and it is looking good there with that MVAC nozzle glowing. And there's our stage 1 view back on our left as it continues to cruise down, getting ready for the start of its landing burn in about 30 seconds here. You can see those hypersonic grid fins of the first stage there on your left, and they control and help orient that first stage as it comes back down to Earth.
Stage 1 transonic.
Again, stage 1 will be targeting landing on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. And right before landing, it will deploy 4 carbon fiber landing legs.
Start of terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Have the start of stage 1 landing burn. This burn will last about 30 seconds. You can see it coming down towards the Atlantic Ocean there. What a beautiful view from that stage 1 camera.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
What an amazing view.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
What an amazing view of that stage 1 landing burn. We got our cameras back just in time for that. And this marks our 79th successful recovery of an orbital class rocket and the 7th recovery of this particular booster.
Expected loss of signal, Kate.
We had an expected loss of signal there, but
Nominal orbital insertion.
we did have confirmation of second engine cutoff and a good orbit. And now stage 2 is going to coast in this orbit for the next 35 minutes or so. And while that happens, take a look at this animation showcasing where we are in the coast phase, and we'll see you back here at T plus 45 minutes for a second stage relight.
Good evening. It is Wednesday, April 28th, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 11:44 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. My name is Jesse Anderson, a lead manufacturing engineer here at SpaceX, joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You're watching a live webcast for our 25th Starlink mission. The last couple of weeks have been particularly exciting for the SpaceX team. Most notably, we just launched 4 astronauts to the space station, helping to bring the total number of astronauts in orbit to a cozy 11. On Friday, April 23rd at 5:49 a.m. Eastern Time, Falcon 9 lifted off, sending the Dragon spacecraft to orbit from historic Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. After just under 24 hours, SpaceX's Dragon autonomously docked with the International Space Station on Saturday, April 24th at 5:08 a.m. Eastern Time. As part of the commercial crew program, NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur, JAXA astronaut Aki Hoshide, and ESA astronaut Thomas Pesquet flew aboard the Dragon spacecraft on its second operational mission to the space station. This was the first time Dragon flew 2 international partners and was also the first time that 2 Crew Dragons have been attached simultaneously to the orbiting laboratory. This was also the first human spaceflight mission to fly astronauts on a flight-proven Falcon 9 and flight-proven Dragon. The Falcon 9 first stage supporting this mission previously launched the Crew 1 mission in November of 2020, and the Dragon spacecraft previously flew Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley to and from the International Space Station during SpaceX's Demo 2 mission in 2020. After an approximate 6-month stay, Dragon and Crew 2 astronauts will depart from the space station no earlier than October 31st for return to Earth and splash down in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Florida. And speaking of splashdowns, while Crew 2 is just beginning their mission on station, Crew 1 is getting ready to splash down in just a few days. Crew 1 NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shannon Walker, as well as Suichi Noguchi of JAXA, are scheduled to undock from the space station to begin their journey home at 5:55 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday, April 30th, with splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean targeted for 11:36 a.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, May 1st. The Crew 1 astronauts have been aboard the space station for nearly 6 months conducting science and research experiments, so we're excited to bring them home in just a few short days. And as if flying humans to and from the space station wasn't exciting enough, NASA announced that they have selected Starship to land the first astronauts on the lunar surface since the Apollo program. Only 24 humans have been to the moon, including NASA astronaut Michael Collins, who passed away earlier today at the age of 90. Collins served as the pilot on the Apollo 11 mission that helped define a pivotal moment for our nation. It's been nearly 50 years since humanity last stepped foot on the moon, and we are honored to follow the path Michael Collins helped lay out years ago. Working with NASA to support a permanent human presence on the moon will require the safe and affordable transportation of crew and significant amounts of cargo. SpaceX's Starship spacecraft and Super Heavy rocket represent an integrated and fully reusable launch, propellant delivery, rendezvous, and planetary lander system. Flying between lunar orbit and the surface of the moon, Starship will carry crew and all of its supplies, equipment, and science payloads needed for extensive surface exploration. Since January 2020, the team has built 10 Starship prototypes, manufactured and tested more than 60 of Starship's Raptor engines, and conducted 6 suborbital flight tests, including 2 100-meter hops and 4 high-altitude flights. We also built a full-size Super Heavy booster as a part of a Pathfinder effort, and currently have 5 vehicles in production. This is truly an extraordinary time for America's human spaceflight program, and we can't wait to support NASA in this effort. In the meantime, let's take a look at the Falcon 9 currently awaiting launch on the pad. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. Our 2-stage launch vehicle stands 70 meters or 229 feet tall. And when it's fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. Now, we prepped Falcon 9 for launch in our hangar at the base of the pad, and upon completing final checkouts, Falcon 9 rolled out to the pad with the Starlink payload and went vertical. That bottom 2/3 of the vehicle is the first stage, and it previously flew 6 times before, having supported the launch of GPS-3 Space Vehicle 3, Turksat 5A, and 4 Starlink missions, the most recent being just over a month ago. The objective of the first stage is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to space and then separate from the rest of the rocket. Once the first stage separates from the second stage, it will make its way back to Earth and target a landing on our drone ship. Just read the instructions, and that is what you're looking at on your screen. Now, to give some perspective, our drone ships are equivalent to the size of a football field, and that landing area is approximately 200 by 150 feet, which is big enough that a hockey rink could fit inside the landing area on the drone ship. Now, if successful, today's landing will mark the 81st recovery of an orbital-class rocket. Above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine, which ignites after the first stage separates. At full power, the Merlin vacuum engine operates with the greatest efficiency ever for an American-made hydrocarbon rocket engine. The second stage is what will carry our Starlink satellites to orbit. Now, at the top of the rocket, what you're looking at on your screen is the fairing. This is made of a carbon composite material, and the fairing protects the satellites on their way to orbit and is jettisoned approximately 3 minutes into flight. Today, we will be attempting to recover each fairing half with a contracted recovery vessel named Sheila Bordelon. Reusability is critical to what we do at SpaceX. Reusability allows SpaceX to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives down costs of space access. Now, at T-minus 10 minutes and about 15 seconds, let's take a look at how we're progressing in the countdown. The chief engineer held a technical poll at T-minus 1 hour, and the launch director held a propellant load and launch go-no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes. Falcon 9 has been loading propellant since T-minus 35 minutes, and our fuel is a refined form of kerosene, which we call RP1. Our oxidizer is a super chilled liquid oxygen called LOX, and to densify the LOX, we chill it well below the boiling point, allowing us to fill the propellant tanks as much as possible. Now we use the same propellant on both stages, as the second stage is primarily a short version of that first stage, which is one of our many reliability features of the Falcon design. With fuel and oxidizer on hand, we do need an ignition source to complete that fire triangle. For this, Falcon 9 uses TTEB, which you'll see at T-minus 2 seconds via the green spark right before the rocket takes off. In addition to RP-1 and LOX aboard, Falcon 9 also uses helium to keep the tank pressurized in flight and the propellant flowing correctly into the engines without air bubbles as the propellants deplete. Helium load began before the webcast went live and will continue to top off until a minute and a half before launch. Now, very shortly, we will open the pre-valves between the first stage engines and the propellant tanks. And at T-minus 7 minutes, engine chill will begin, and that's where we cool the turbo pumps and avoid thermal shocks when we start the pumps at T-minus 2 seconds to light the Merlin engines. The vehicle is healthy, and we are currently working, no issues. The range is green for launch. Weather is looking good. We're about 90% favorable for launch at T0 today. And all systems continue to be go for an on-time liftoff at 11:44 p.m. Eastern Time. If for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 11:22 p.m. Eastern Time. We talked a lot about human spaceflight activities at the front of the webcast. This is why SpaceX was founded. Ultimately, our goal is to enable regular human transport to and from the moon, Mars, and beyond. Our focus on human spaceflight played a significant role in our development of Starlink. It was critical that we build a constellation in a way that ensures space stays safe for all missions, particularly human spaceflight missions. So we approached our satellite constellation differently than others have in the past. We've talked previously on the webcast about how more satellites at a lower orbit result in better service, but characteristics of those lower orbits also help act as a natural debris removal system. Starlink satellites are designed to deorbit at the end of their useful life, but in the unlikely event that they don't, the natural gravitational pull of the Earth will pull them out of orbit so that they don't stay in space indefinitely. This is very different than traditional comm satellites at even slightly higher orbits that will be circling our Earth for hundreds of years. And unlike our Falcon 9 rocket, Starlink satellites are not designed to survive re-entry. In fact, Starlink satellites are designed to be fully demisable, meaning that they burn up when they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Beyond making sure satellites deorbit at the end of their useful life, we also need to ensure we didn't run into any other satellites or objects in space. We cannot talk about space safety without mentioning the amazing folks at the 18th Space Squadron who keep track of space debris so that we can effectively dodge it. In fact, Starlink satellites are designed to be fully demisable, meaning that they burn up when they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Beyond making sure satellites deorbit at the end of their useful life, we also need to ensure we didn't run into any other satellites or objects in conjunctions with we cannot talk about space safety without mentioning the amazing folks at the 18th Space Squadron are sent to keep track of space debris so that we can effectively avoid any objects that might cross our day to be fully demisable, meaning that they burn satellites or data to be used by the 18th Space Control Squadron for collision avoidance by the 18th and their useful life. We also in addition to working we didn't run into any other satellites or objects or conjunctions with we cannot talk about space safety without mentioning the amazing folks at the screening Starlink and NASA sent to joint space Starlink satellites so that they can avoid any objects that might cross our data sharing as SpaceX also uploads their own data to be used by the 18th Space many SpaceX satellite avoidance by the 18th and their useful life. We also need to work we didn't understand any other satellites or objects or conjunctions with we cannot talk about space safety without mentioning the amazing folks at the screening Starlink and NASA sent to joint space Starlink satellites particularly as level dodge space flight and the 3 times per day as SpaceX also uploads their own data to be used by the 18th Space many squadrons not satellite avoidance by the 18th and their operations, but in addition to working space we didn't understand any other satellites or objects or conjunctions options for we can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing satellite Starlink and also sign up for space remains so that you're respected level of coordination by 30 times per day waiting for the demand for only data to use space and space for many uses are not regulated by the EU space airways, but all of the space remains in providing the space project in the development plan. We can assume the space travelers without naming the amazing
Stage 1, entry burn down.
And that concludes.
Stage 2 continues to follow a nominal trajectory.
That concludes the entry burn, and then we also got to call out that stage 2 is still nominal. The next event coming up will be in about a minute from now. That'll be the landing burn, the start of the landing burn on the first stage. And what you're looking at live on your screen is a view from the second stage looking aft at the MVAC engine. That MVAC engine has a thrust of 220,500 pounds of thrust in a vacuum. It's a very, very powerful engine taking our Starlink satellites to their targeted drop-off orbit.
Stage 1 transonic.
Still getting good call-outs on that first stage. We're about 15 seconds or so away from that landing burn beginning on the first stage. Stage 2 still looking good.
Stage 1 landing burn.
The landing burn has begun. Let's watch and see if this Falcon 9 can land on our drone ship. Just read the instructions. And a really cool onboard view.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
And there you can see the first stage Falcon 9 has landed for its 7th time. This marks our 81st successful recovery of an orbital class rocket, and again the 7th flight and 7th landing of this booster. And then we heard a good call out for SECO. That's second engine cutoff.
Nominal parking orbit insertion.
And a good orbital
Expected
insertion.
loss of signal, Cape.
Now stage 2 is going to coast in this orbit for the next 35 minutes or so. So while that happens, we'll keep you posted on where we are in the coast phase. We'll see you back here at T plus 45 minutes for a second stage relay.
Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, May 4th, and on your screen is a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 3:01 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. My name is Shiva Bharadwaj. I'm a space operations engineer, and I'm joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. And what you're watching a live webcast for our 10th Starlink mission of 2021 and our 26th Starlink mission overall. Now, if you're curious, Starlink is a satellite internet constellation designed and manufactured by SpaceX that can provide high-speed, low-latency internet to people living in remote and rural areas across the globe. To date, over 500,000 people have placed an order or put down a deposit for Starlink. And with every launch, we get closer to connecting more people across the world. Starlink is the world's largest satellite constellation, made possible with the help of our Falcon 9 orbital class reusable rocket. And today will actually mark SpaceX's 115th launch of a Falcon 9. Now, if you've been following along, it's been a really busy year for us here at SpaceX. So far, we've had 16 launches in 2021, including 3 high-altitude tests of a Starship prototype and a human spaceflight mission to the International Space Station for NASA. Just this past weekend, after spending about 6 months in space, we brought the 4 astronauts of the Crew 1 mission back home to Earth, and a little bit later in the broadcast, we'll be sharing more details about their return flight. Now, just under T-minus 10 minutes to go, all systems are currently go. Why don't we take a closer look at the Falcon 9? You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. That's our 2-stage rocket. It's over 70 meters tall. That's greater than the wingspan of a 747 aircraft. And for all of you Star Wars fans out there, happy Star Wars Day. If you weren't aware, Falcon 9 was actually named after the Millennium Falcon. Now, Falcon 9 is twice the height of a Millennium Falcon, but that number 9 indicates the number of Merlin 1D engines on the first stage, which is that bottom 2/3 section of the vehicle. With the help of 9 Merlin engines, its objective is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to space, and then it will separate from the rest of the vehicle about 2.5 minutes into flight. From there, it'll make its way back to Earth and target a landing on a recovery vessel named Of Course I Still Love You, which is stationed off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. Now you can tell from the soot on this first stage that it's been to space before. Today will be the 9th flight for this booster, and if we're successful landing Falcon 9, it'll mark the 82nd recovery of an orbital class rocket. On top of the first stage is our black carbon fiber inner stage. On top of that is Falcon 9's second stage. It has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine that will ignite shortly after the first stage separates. Now, it's the second stage that will carry our stack of Starlink satellites to orbit, and then we'll deploy those satellites just after the T+1 Our satellites are safely enclosed inside the 17-foot diameter payload fairing, which is this nose cone structure at the top of the rocket. Its job is to protect the payload from aerothermal loads, heating, and contamination during the ascent phase. Now, once we reach the vacuum of space, we'll jettison the fairing as the second stage continues on to orbit. Today will be the 3rd flight for one of the fairing halves, and the other one is brand new, and we will be attempting to recover each with a contracted recovery vessel named Sheila Morton. Quick update on the weather. As you can see, it's a beautiful day at the Cape. Ascent weather is looking fantastic at the pad. Recovery weather is also looking quite good. So with that, vehicle, satellites, weather, range, all looking good for an on-time liftoff just a few minutes from now. Now, if for some reason today during the count, if we're not able to launch, we do have a backup opportunity to. As I mentioned earlier, today we are launching from the historic Launch Pad 39A. This is the same launch pad responsible for sending NASA astronauts to the moon in the 1960s, and more recently, helping bring human spaceflight back to the United States after the conclusion of the Space Shuttle program in 2011. Less than 2 weeks ago, SpaceX launched its 3rd human spaceflight mission with a flight-proven booster and Dragon spacecraft from this very pad. This time, we had 4 crew members on board. Those were NASA astronauts Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur, European Space Agency astronaut Thomas Pesquet, and Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency astronaut Aki Hoshide. That was the start of the 6-month Crew 2 mission to the International Space Station. Just 8 days later, after spending 167 days in space, the Crew 1 astronauts returned to Earth on Sunday, May 2nd, making their journey the longest duration mission for a U.S. spacecraft since the final Skylab mission in 1974. With NASA astronauts Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shannon Walker aboard, as well as JAXA astronaut Soichi Noguchi, Dragon autonomously undocked from the International Space Station at 8:35 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday, May 1st. The spacecraft performed a series of departure burns to move away from the orbiting laboratory. You can actually see here those Draco thrusters firing on the Dragon spacecraft. We spent a little bit of time in orbit, and then had an opportunity to come back to Earth. The spacecraft re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, deployed its 2 drogue chutes and 4 main chutes in preparation for a soft water landing, and upon splashdown, SpaceX quickly recovered Dragon from the water as well as the Crew 1 astronauts. Now, this was the first nighttime splashdown of a U.S. spacecraft with crew on board since Apollo 8 in 1968. Now, the crew, as you can see, were pretty happy, healthy, and really seemed to enjoy the ride aboard Dragon. It's been a fantastic couple of weeks for the human spaceflight program, and the team here at SpaceX is honored to have been a part of it. Now, we are just at T-minus 5 minutes away from liftoff. Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of its countdown. We're currently awaiting the transporter erector, or TE, retraction. The transporter erector is that structure, the white structure to the left of the vehicle. It provides liquids, gases, and electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload. And just about now, actually, we should start to see the transporter erector beginning its retract process. So first we'll see that clamp that you can see right underneath the payload fairing starting to retract. And then shortly after, the transporter erector will move away from the vertical position to about 2 degrees away from the vertical. And then finally, around T-minus 0, hydraulics will pull away the transporter erector farther from Falcon 9, clearing the way for it to ascend. At this point, the first stage is nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Keep an eye out here for the transporter erector now on the right side of the vehicle. should start to retract away shortly. Now, super chilled liquid oxygen, which you can actually see some of the gas clouds forming from, that's our propellant oxidizer. It forms those white clouds around the rocket as it comes into contact with the moist Florida atmosphere. We're constantly topping up the propellant in these final minutes until liftoff, and those small oxygen vents overboard form these clouds. There's transporter erector retracting to that 2-degree position. Coming up in about 15 seconds, we should hear a call out for prop loading complete on the first stage. Then coming up shortly after that will actually be a call out for the second stage completing its prop loading. Expect that call around T-minus 2 minutes. You can see a little bit of the wind there, still gentle enough for ascent today. Now, after T-minus 2 minutes, the next activity will be at T-minus 60 seconds. That's when Falcon 9 will transition into startup. That's when Falcon 9's internal flight computers will take over the countdown until essentially through the rest of the mission. But again, next activity here is prop load closeout on the second stage.
천파 공주님을 찾으러 왔던 길은 아니지만 분위기를 보니 이곳이 오만 무덤이
Fuel load
확실해.
is complete.
But that Falcon 9, from a prop perspective, is ready to go. Team still not working any issues on Falcon 9. That venting you're seeing there is nominal. Again, that's liquid oxygen from the transporter erector. In the lines in the transporter erector that we're venting, and as it comes into contact with the warm Florida atmosphere, turns into a gas and humidifies and forms clouds with the humidity in Florida. Coming up, transition into startup. Shortly after, we'll hear the final poll from the launch director, giving their go for launch.
Flight computers in startup.
Falcon 9, Starlink LD is go for launch.
Fantastic news. So with that, launch teams in the vehicle looking healthy, ready to go for launch. T-minus 30 seconds to go. Why don't we listen in to the terminal
T-minus
count
30 seconds.
for Falcon 9 taking our Starlinks to orbit.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff. May the force be with us.
Stage 1 chamber pressures are nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Plus 40 seconds into flight, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from our pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center, carrying a stack of Starlink satellites into orbit. Coming up, we have just throttled down for the point of maximum dynamic pressure, or max Q. That's when we experience the highest structural loads on the vehicle. That's from the combination of how fast we're moving through the Earth's atmosphere.
Falcon 9 is supersonic.
Increasing our velocity as the density of the atmosphere continues to decrease.
max Q.
With that, we are through the highest structural loads on the vehicle. Upcoming in about a minute, we'll have 3 events happening back to back. First of those will be main engine cutoff, or MECO. That's where we will shut down all 9 of those Merlin 1D engines to slow down the vehicle in preparation for stage separation. That's the next event where the first
started.
and second stages will separate. Stage 1 starting to make its way back down to landing. And stage 2 will continue on with the third event, second engine start number 1, or SES1. That's where the Merlin vacuum engine will ignite and then continue to propel the second stage along with the payload to orbit. You heard the call there for MVAC engine chill. That means we've started flowing a small amount of propellant into the turbo pumps on the Merlin vacuum to prepare it for the full flow when we perform second engine start. Coming up shortly, about 2.5 minutes into flight, main engine cutoff, followed by stage separation, and then shortly after, second engine start, number 1.
Stage separation confirmed.
Left-hand side of your screen, you can see a view for the first stage, interstage, grid fins starting to deploy. Second engine start complete on the right-hand side, that glow of the Merlin vacuum engine. Shortly, we'll see fairing deployment.
Fairing separation confirmed.
View from inside the fairing halves, you can see them separating away from the vehicle. Now, as a reminder, we will be recovering that. Oh, awesome. You can see a view there of one of the fairing halves from going on back to Earth for recovery. As a reminder, we will be attempting to recover both halves with a contracted vessel named Sheila Bordelon. First stage, left-hand side of your screen, grid fins are fully deployed at this point. Those periodic bursts of white gas that you see are from our attitude control system. So the attitude control system giving some small puffs of nitrogen gas, reorienting the stage to get the engines down and the heat shield down for its upcoming events. Second stage burn continuing to look nominal. Now the
acquisition signal Bermuda.
While the second stage is continuing on to orbit, this first stage has a couple of activities in order to make its way back to Earth. First is an entry burn. It'll ignite 3 of its M1D or Merlin 1D engines. That helps to slow down the vehicle as we start re-entering the upper parts of the Earth's atmosphere. The next event will be just before touchdown on the drone ship. That is a landing burn. We'll ignite just a single center Merlin engine, and that's what will bring the vehicle speed rapidly down to 0 for a soft touchdown on the drone ship. You can see the first stage reorienting on the left-hand side of your screen.
Both stages continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Fantastic news from the navigation officer that we're on our planned trajectories. Now, the first stage is targeting our drone ship named, of course, I Still Love You, which is stationed off the east coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. A view looking out of the interstage. Not too long ago, we had a second stage engine in there. Just what you see now on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, the grid fins, which are those waffle-like structures that you see around the vehicle, those are more important once we get into the Earth's atmosphere. We use those to guide and direct the first stage towards our drone ship. And so as we start getting more atmospheric pressure and force, as the density of the atmosphere picks up and our altitude drops, those grid fins start to gain control authority and help direct the first stage on its trajectory. Coming up shortly, on the left-hand side of your screen, first stage entry burn. That burn expected to last about 20 seconds. We'll be igniting 3 of the Merlin engines on the first stage to slow down the vehicle in preparation for atmospheric entry.
Stage 1 flight termination system is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
You can see the plume of the Merlin 1 engines getting pushed back from how fast the stage is moving, rapidly decelerating.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Successful shutdown of those
Stages
Merlin 1D.
continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Successful shutdown of those Merlin 1D engines. Next burn on the first stage will be just after T+8 minutes. That'll be the landing burn start, just a single Merlin engine there. And around the time that the first stage should touch down on our drone ship, the second stage will also conclude its burn with an event called SECO 1, or Secondary Engine Cutoff Number 1.
Stage 1 transonic.
Call out there for transonic, meaning that we are starting to pick up speed in the Earth's atmosphere, sort of in that in-between range between subsonic and supersonic, meaning faster, supersonic meaning faster than speed of sound. Some beautiful views
Stage
of
2 is in terminal guidance.
planet Earth with our second stage Merlin vacuum engine on the right-hand side.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Startup of the landing burn. You can see the drone ship on our screen.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Looks like we're coming right down on target. Now, listen out here for secondary engine cutoff.
Stage 1 landing confirmed.
There's a first stage
Expected loss of signal at Cape Canaveral.
on the left-hand side of your screen. 9th recovery for this
Stage
booster.
2 flight termination system is saved.
82nd successful recovery of an orbital class rocket, and SECO called out at the same time, meaning the second stage engine has also shut down. Navigation officer will be doing a check of our
Nominal
trajectory.
parking orbit insertion.
We are in a nominal orbit. So at that, second stage is going to coast in this orbit for the next about 35 minutes. While that's happening, you can take a look at this animation to see where we are in our coast phase. We'll be coming back here for a very short relight of the second stage engine to get into our payload deployment orbit. That'll be at about T+45 minutes. I hope to see you back then.
Acquisition of signal Newfoundland.
You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 2:42 a.m. Eastern Time liftoff from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Hello and welcome to the live webcast for our 27th Starlink mission. My name is Michael Andrews and I'm a supply chain supervisor here at SpaceX. It's still Saturday evening here at our SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, but it's just after 2:30 a.m. on Sunday, May 9th at the launch site in Florida. Tonight's launch will mark a record-breaking 10th flight of a single first-stage booster. SpaceX's first reuse of an orbital-class rocket was on the SES-10 mission way back in March 2017. We've certainly come a long way since then. In terms of our payload, Starlink is a satellite internet constellation designed and manufactured by us here at SpaceX that can provide a high-speed, low-latency internet to people living in remote and rural locations around the globe. To date, over 500,000 people have placed an order or put down a deposit of Starlink service, and with every launch we get closer to connecting more people across the world. If you've been following Starlink's progress, you'll know that our Starlink beta service is now available in the United States, in Canada, the UK, Western Germany, and the South Island of New Zealand. And as of this week, we are excited to announce that we've expanded our coverage areas to include Austria and France. For those of you who speak French, you can now access starlink.com en français. Vive la France. As we launch more satellites, install more ground stations, and continue to improve our networking software, our data speed, latency, and uptime will improve dramatically. In addition to being able to provide our customers with better service, with every Starlink launch, we get closer to our goal of near global coverage of the populated world. As many of you might know, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here in the United States. This month is dedicated to recognizing and celebrating Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders that have helped shape our nation's history and culture through multiple generations. Here at SpaceX, we're committed to challenging all aspects of our business to make sure we're all around inclusive and that we hire folks from a diverse background. To kick off the month of May, we're proud to partner with our internal Asian American Pacific Islander Employee Network, known as APIX, to celebrate AAPI heritage and also support relief work in India, to assist in COVID-19 related emergencies, but also to help end poverty and achieve social justice. To learn more about Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, please check out asianpacificheritage.gov. In terms of our mission, currently we're at T-minus 9.5 minutes and all systems are go for an on-time liftoff tonight. There are a few major milestones to watch out for during our launch. The first is stage separation. This is where the first and second stages separate from each other about 2.5 minutes after liftoff. After stage sep, the first stage will return back to Earth and attempt its record-breaking 10th landing on our drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. Now, while that's happening, our second stage will continue on its journey. In order to get our satellites to their intended orbit tonight, we have 2 coast phases, and we'll be igniting our Merlin vacuum engine twice, with the eventual deployment of our Starlink satellites occurring around T+1 hour 4 minutes. Currently, we're just under 9 minutes to liftoff, and all systems are go for an on-time liftoff this evening. With that being said, let's take a closer look at the rocket you see on your screen. Here's a live view of Falcon 9. It's our 2-stage liquid-fueled rocket. Falcon 9 is approximately 229 feet tall. That's slightly taller than a 21-story building. And like I mentioned earlier, we're flying today's booster for a record-breaking 10th time today. This particular first stage booster first flew on the Crew Demo 1 mission back in March of 2019 and has since supported 2 additional commercial launches and 6 other Starlink missions, not including the 7th one tonight. The bottom 2/3 of our vehicle is known as the first stage. You can see the soot markings left over from its previous knock flights. The first stage accelerates the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space with the help of 9 Merlin engines located at the base of the rocket. And like I said before, we're going to be attempting to recover that first stage for that 10th time on our drone ship you see pictured here. It's known as Just Read the Instructions. Going further up on our vehicle, you'll see a black carbon fiber interstage ring, and on top of that is that white Falcon 9 second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum engine. We call it the MVAC engine. Once first instances separate at 2.5 minutes after liftoff, the MVAC engine will ignite and eventually carries the Starlink satellites into an elliptical orbit around the Earth. And at the very top, you'll notice the large nose cone at the very top of the rocket. This is called our fairing. That's where the stack of 60 brand new Starlink satellites is safely enclosed. The fairing protects the satellites from aerothermal heating, aerodynamic loads, and contamination during its ascent. Once we reach the vacuum of space, we'll jettison those 2 fairing halves as the second stage continues on its journey to orbit. And similar to our first stage, this fairing assembly is protecting our payload tonight. Previously flew on the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 4 mission, and we'll be attempting to retrieve each fairing half from the water using the recovery ship Sheila board-along. In terms of propellant loading, we began loading prop since T-minus 35 minutes, and it's still ongoing. We use a rocket-grade kerosene, known as RP1, as our fuel, and we use a super chilled liquid oxygen, known as LOX, as our oxidizer, and when combined, they help power the Falcon 9. Currently, RP1 and LOX are nearly fully loaded on both stages, and LOX will continue to be topped off right until the final minutes of the countdown.
Load is complete.
In terms of weather, the latest forecast is 80% favorable for liftoff, and weather conditions look good for booster recovery as well. With that, the vehicle, the satellites, the weather, and the range are all looking good for an on-time liftoff just a few minutes from now. But if for some reason we do not launch today, we have a backup launch opportunity available tomorrow, Monday morning at 2:21 a.m. Eastern Time. For those of you following SpaceX, you know that it's been an exciting time for the development of our Starship launch system. Just a few days ago, on Wednesday, May 5th, Starship serial number 15, known as SN15, successfully completed SpaceX's 5th high-altitude flight test of a Starship prototype from Starbase, Texas. Our Starship spacecraft and Super Heavy rocket, collectively referred to as the Starship, are designed to be a fully reusable transportation system that can carry both crew and cargo to Earth's orbit, the Moon, Mars, and beyond. Similar to previous high-altitude flight tests of Starship, serial number 15 was powered through ascent by its 3 Raptor engines, with each shutting off in sequence prior to the vehicle reaching its apogee, approximately 10 kilometers above sea level. SN15 then performed a propellant transition to the internal header tanks, which hold landing propellant, before reorienting itself for re-entry and a controlled aerodynamic descent. Finally, the Raptor engines ignited as the vehicle performed the landing flip maneuver immediately before successfully touching down on the landing pad. Now, these test flights and Pathfinders are all about developing a transportation system that can help humanity return to the Moon, travel to Mars, and even go beyond. Please stay tuned for additional test flights in the days ahead, and be sure to check our social media accounts for more Starship updates. We're currently about 4 minutes from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into those final stages of the countdown. We're currently waiting for the next milestone. That's where the transporter erector, or the TE, will retract. That's the white painted structure right next to the vehicle. First, you'll see here, it's happening right now. Actually, the TE clamps have opened, and then the transporter erector will begin to retract away from the rocket ever so slightly, just a few degrees. You can see it happening right now, actually. And then it'll wait there for a few minutes, and then it'll move again at T-0. Hydraulics are going to pull the TE farther away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off and helps create space for Falcon 9 to clear the pad. Think of the TE as kind of the umbilical cord to the rocket. It provides liquids, gases, electrical connections, all to the second stage, and also provides air conditioning to the payload fairing. In terms of propellant, the first and second stages are nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Superchilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer, and that's what's creating those white clouds you see forming around Falcon 9 near the inner stage. That's because the warm, humid, ambient Floridian air causes the liquid oxygen to turn into gas upon contact. The first stage of top loading is ending right around now, and the second stage of top loading should end at T-2 minutes. And we just heard call out that top loading has been completed on the first stage. The last big major milestone is T-minus 60 minutes. That's where we'll say that Falcon 9 is in startup mode. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. And just 2 seconds from liftoff, we begin to light the 9 Merlin 1D engines, and we're set for liftoff. The Starlink payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is still 80% favorable, and the range has cleared the surrounding ground, water, and airspace. We're green for launch in just 2 minutes away. At this point in time, just under 2 minutes, LOX loading on the second stage is wrapping up.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
We've just heard confirmation that LOX loading is complete on the second stage. You're going to start to see a larger accumulation of white clouds forming around the vehicle. That's totally normal at this point. That's because we've topped off the vehicle with liquid oxygen, and any excess there is going to vent in oil as it becomes exposed to the ambient air. This time, the first and second stages are beginning to pressurize for launch, and we're about 10 seconds away from that startup call out.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
We've heard that startup call out, and we're now waiting for that final go for launch call out from our launch director.
Falcon 9, Starlink, LDs go for launch.
We're ready to go. Falcon 9's ready to go. All systems are go for launch. Now let's listen into the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our 60 Starlink satellites into orbit on its 10th flight.
T-minus 15 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition and liftoff. Let's go Falcon for number 10.
Vehicles pitching down
Stage 1 chamber pressure is nominal.
All right, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, carrying yet again another stack of 60 Starlink satellites to orbit. Just moments ago, we throttled the engines down in preparation for Max Q. That's the point of maximum aerodynamic pressure, occurs right after we go supersonic. After this point, we're then able to throttle the engines back up. That call is just about 10 seconds away.
Max Q.
We successfully crossed the Max Q threshold. We're throttling our Merlin engines back up. As the atmosphere gets thinner and thinner, the stresses on the vehicle continue to diminish. And we're just about a minute away from 3 major events happening one after another. Main engine cutoff, known as MECO, stage separation, and second engine start 1. To explain the first one, MECO, this is where all 9 M1D engines shut off and they slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage 7. And that's where, once again, the first stage and second stage separate. Stage 1 makes its way back down to sea level for landing, and stage 2 continues its primary mission, along with the fact that the MBAC engine lights up and propels that second stage along with the Starlink satellites to orbit.
Following a nominal trajectory.
We're 30 seconds away from those events. Falcon 9 continues to be on nominal trajectory. Our MBAC engine is starting to chill to prepare for that second engine start just about 20 seconds from now. Shortly after these 3 events, our fairing will deploy and expose the Starlink satellites to the vacuum of space.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
All good news so far. The 9 Merlin engines have shut down, our first and second stages are heading their separate ways, and our MBAC engine has begun burning and will continue to do so for about the next 6 minutes.
Fairing duration confirmed.
We have confirmation, and you can see it there. The 2 fairing halves have jettisoned and are heading back down. As a reminder, this is the second flight for these fairing halves, and we'll be attempting to recover them once again via a wet recovery from the contracted recovery vessel Sheila Bordelon. Everything is nominal so far.
Both vehicles continue to follow nominal trajectories.
We're just about 4 minutes after liftoff. For those of you just joining us, we have a lot going on. On the right-hand side of your screen, you can see our second stage and its MBAC engine is burning, carrying 60 Starlink satellites to orbit. And on the other hand, we have our first stage beginning its 10th recovery attempt. As stage 2 continues to burn, as you see here, stage 1 is actually going to execute 2 separate burns in order to make its way back to Earth. The first of which is the entry burn, just a little more than 2 minutes from now. 3 of those M1D engines will reignite. This helps slows the first stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere and reduces the loads on the vehicle. After that burn starts, ends, and is confirmed successful, we get ready for our final burn, the landing burn. It's a single center engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship safely. And as a reminder, we can't stress it enough, tonight marks the 10th flight for this particular first stage. This is a record for our Falcon 9 rocket's life cycle. This particular booster first debuted on our Crew Demo 1 mission just over a year ago. Now, reusability is critical to what we do at SpaceX. This fact that we can reuse our first stages, it allows us to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives down the ultimate cost to space access. And although this is the 10th time for this rocket, we first reused the Orbital class rocket on the SES-10 mission back in March of 2017. It just goes to show how far we've come since then. About a minute away from that entry burn beginning. That burn should last for about 20 seconds. About 30 seconds away from that first stage entry burn igniting. The center engine will ignite at first. 2 more engines will ignite shortly after that. The Merlins on this first stage are optimized to operate at sea level, and they achieve about 190,000 pounds of thrust apiece during ascent and descent. A few seconds away.
FTS saved.
Few seconds away from the entry burn.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
You can see that plume is starting to expand as the other 2 engines begin to fire.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
And there you go, the entry burn has successfully ended. And now we're just a little more than a minute and a half away from the final burn.
Continue to follow nominal trajectories.
Now, for those of you who follow along with SpaceX, you know that the soot that you see on a rocket indicates it's been flown before. Here's an explanation of how that soot forms and why that first stage is so dirty in this case. The rocket-grade kerosene, RP1, that powers Falcon 9 is carbon-based, and when you burn it, it creates soot. Now, as we approach the landing site, like you saw just now, that long entry burn slows the vehicle down, and since we come in engines first, the booster flies through its own plume and exhaust, which deposits soot in the rocket. And if you watch the feed, like you saw just there, you saw that soot starting to fly up and stick to the lens. We're only about 20 seconds away from that landing burn starting, and also during that time our 4 landing legs will deploy while that single engine is firing to help us safely land on just reading instructions.
Stage 1 landing burn startup.
See it there, our landing burn's begun. Hopefully we get continuous coverage.
Terminal guidance.
And also our second engine will cut off shortly after this landing attempt.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Continuous views right there. This looked great.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
And there you have it. We have a confirmation of a successful 10th landing of this booster and the 83rd overall successful recovery of the Falcon 9 first stage. Very exciting. This booster gets to live again. In terms of the second stage, we're waiting for that second engine to cut off. That second engine has cut
Nominal
off.
orbit insertion.
And we have confirmation from the GNC team that we are now in a good parking orbit. Second stage is now going to coast in this orbit for the next 35 minutes or so. We'll leave you with two things. We're going to leave you with this animation showing you where you're at in this coast phase, along with some groovy space tunes. We'll see you back here around T plus 44 minutes for that second engine start to phase.
Good evening. It's Saturday, May 15th, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 6:56 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. My name is Kate Tice, a senior certification engineer here at SpaceX, joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You're watching a live webcast for our 28th Starlink mission and our 15th mission of this year. If you've been following Starlink development, then you know that Starlink is a constellation of multiple satellites that orbit the planet at about 550 kilometers and have the potential to service the entire globe. Because Starlink doesn't rely on traditional ground infrastructure, it's ideally suited for areas of the globe where connectivity has typically been a challenge or non-existent, rural or remote communities. Tonight's launch also marks the second SpaceX rideshare mission of 2021. So instead of the 60 Starlink satellites we typically launch, tonight we'll reduce that number to 52 Starlink satellites to make room for two payloads from our customers, Capella Space and Tyvak. Capella Space is launching a synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, satellite into low Earth orbit to join its growing constellation of 24/7 all-weather Earth observation satellites. Capella's automated systems collect very high-resolution, high-speed imagery of the planet's surface. Following deployment on SpaceX's Transporter-1 mission earlier this year, the Capella constellation covered breaking global events at night and through clouds, including the Ever Given's blockage of the Suez Canal and the recent volcanic eruption on St. Vincent. Once fully commissioned, each additional satellite provides Capella's government and commercial customers with more capacity and increasingly timely SAR data. SpaceX offers multiple launch opportunities each month for small satellites to ride to space on existing low Earth orbit missions, and we're excited to have both Capella Space and Tyvak along for the ride tonight. We're currently approaching the T-minus 10 minute mark from liftoff, so with that, let's take a closer look at the rocket on your screen.
I'm Ian McCullough, a sourcing manager here at SpaceX. You're looking at a live view of Falcon 9. Our two-stage launch vehicle stands about 70 meters tall, and when it is fully fueled, it'll hold just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. The bottom two-thirds of the vehicle is the first stage. Tonight will be its 8th flight and 4th flight of the year so far. The stage's maiden flight was the Crew Demo 2 about a year ago. Since then, it supported the Anasis 2 mission, CRS-21, Transporter-1, and 3 other Starlink missions. Its objective is to accelerate the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to space and then separate from the rest of the rocket. Once the first stage separates from the second stage, it will make its way back to Earth and target a landing on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. To give some perspective, our drone ships are the equivalent of the size of a football field, and the landing area is approximately 200 feet by 150 feet. That's big enough that a hockey rink could fit inside of it. If successful, it will mark our 84th recovery of an orbital class rocket. Above the first stage is the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine that ignites after the first stage separates. At full power, the Merlin vacuum engine operates with the greatest efficiency for an American-made hydrocarbon rocket engine. The second stage is what will carry our Starlink satellites to orbit. At the top of the rocket, you'll also notice a large nose cone. This is called the fairing. The fairing houses the Starlink satellites and protects them until the vehicle is outside of the Earth's atmosphere, at which point the fairing separates to expose the satellites to space. Today, we will be using a flight-proven fairing, and this will be the second flight for each fairing. And we'll be attempting to recover each from the water today with our recovery vessel, Sheila Bordelon. Lastly, the large truss structure you see there is the Transporter Erector, or TE. We use it to roll the rocket out to the pad and raise it to its vertical launch position. The TE also routes the vehicle's fluids, power, and telemetry umbilicals from the ground systems to the rocket and satellites until F9 goes on internal power and clears the pad. At liftoff, it will retract in order to clear the way for Falcon 9 to set. At T-minus 8 minutes, let's take a look at how we're progressing in the countdown.
The chief engineer held a technical poll at T-minus 1 hour, and the launch director held a propellant load and launch go-no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes. Falcon 9 has been loading propellant since T-minus 35 minutes. Our fuel is a refined form of kerosene known as rocket propellant 1 or RP1. Our oxidizer is a super chilled liquid called LOX. We chill it well below the boiling point, which densifies the LOX so we can load more of it into Falcon 9. We've also begun helium loading. The vehicle uses helium gas as a pressurant in the fuel and LOX tanks. As the Merlin engine pumps pull RP1 and LOX out of the tanks, we fill that empty volume, known as the ullage, with helium that's heated up by the engines. Heating the helium helps expand it to fill the propellant tanks. And to make sure that startup goes well, we also perform what's called engine chill. Right about now, at T-minus 7 minutes, we're flowing a small amount of that super chilled liquid oxygen into the 9 Merlin engine turbopumps. We do this to avoid any thermal shock to the system when the full flow of super chilled LOX hits the prop system. The vehicle is healthy and we're currently tracking no issues. The range is green to support, and as for weather, beautiful shot there of our launch site. It's a gorgeous day in Florida. We were predicted 70% favorable conditions for launch. Main concerns being liftoff winds and cumulus clouds around the launch site, as well as recovery zone winds, but everything is looking in balance for now. So, all systems continue to be go for a liftoff at 6:56 p.m. Eastern Time. If for some reason we don't get to launch today, we have a backup opportunity tomorrow at 6:34 p.m.
Today, more than 8 million Americans live in areas without access to high-speed internet. Many communities that historically have had poor or non-existent internet, the impacts of the current pandemic make life more challenging. One such community that has been underserved are the residents of Montclair, Wisconsin. This week, the city announced that it is beta by offering 50 homes and businesses Starlink connectivity. These users will now be able to access high-speed internet services, accessing healthcare remotely, and receiving an online education. Currently, our Starlink beta services are in the United States, the United Kingdom, Western Germany, the South Island of New Zealand, Austria, and France. And this week, we are excited to announce that we are now serving parts of the Netherlands. As we continue to grow our Starlink beta program customer base, we are also growing and expanding our infrastructure. Earlier this week, we announced that SpaceX will be locating our Starlink ground station within Google's data center to deliver secure and high-speed internet to users. Locating ground stations at data centers will significantly improve the user terminal to the server without touching the internet. To learn more about Starlink or find out services available in your area, head on over to starlink.com.
We're currently at T-minus 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. The next visual milestone will be the retraction of the transport director, the white painted structures there next to the vehicle. As the name indicates, we use to transport the vehicle from the hangar to the pad and raise it to the vertical launch position. First, we'll see the TE clamps open. That should be coming up in just a few seconds. And then the TE will begin to retract away from the rocket slightly. At T0, the hydraulics will pull the TE further away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off.
여유리 중시도는 입구까지밖에 없어. 안쪽에서 길을 찾는데 게다가 두 개를 자 준비하게.
The TE provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing. The first and second stages are both nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. The super chilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer and is the source of the white clouds that we can start to see forming around Falcon 9. That happens when the warm, humid Florida air comes into contact with the full liquid oxygen, the rocket itself, and then turns into the white gas clouds that we can start to see. The first stage will be finishing prop loading here in about 15 seconds at T-minus 3 minutes, and the second stage wraps up its prop load at T-minus 2 minutes. At T-minus 60 seconds, we'll hear the call out that Falcon 9 is the startup. This means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken over the launch countdown. Then, within inside T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin M1D engine. We use TEB as our ignition fluid. When it mixes with oxygen, it burns a bright green colored flame, so be sure to watch out for that. We then allow the fuel. Alright, and then we heard the call out that stage 1 LOX load is complete. Stage 2 continues to load in LOX. As I was saying, after we use TTEB to ignite the Merlin engine, we then allow full flow of the fuel into the thrust chambers, and then the engine comes up to power for liftoff at At this point, the Starlink payload continues to be healthy. F-19 is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather continues to look gorgeous, and the range has cleared through ground, water, and airspace, and is green for launch just 2 minutes from now.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
Alright, there we heard the call out that stage 2 LOX load is complete. This means that Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with all propellants on both stages. If you look at the shadow of the rocket there on the pad, we can see some shadow of the white clouds that are forming around the pad. Like I mentioned before, that's just the liquid oxygen vaporizing with the ambient air. Now that LOX load is complete and that propellant line is locked off to the vehicle, that leftover LOX in the line basically turn into gas and form the white clouds that we see. All right, there we heard the call out that flight computer is going to start up. This means that the autonomous flight computer has taken over the launch countdown. And at this point, both first and second stage are beginning to pressurize for launch.
Falcon 9, Starlink LDs go for launch.
All right, there we heard our launch director give the final
30 seconds.
There we heard the launch director give our final go for launch. And at this point in time, all systems are go. Let's listen in to the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our stack of Starlink satellites and 2 ride shares into space.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff.
Falcon 9 is pitching downrange.
As you can see, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from the historic launch pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center, carrying our stack of Starlink satellites and 2 ride shares into orbit. We throttle the engines down in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure. This is the largest structural load that the vehicle sees during ascent, so slowing the vehicle down helps during that short period.
Max Q.
All right, there we heard the call out that we reached max Q. In about a minute, we're going to have 3 events happening back to back. First will be main engine cutoff, or as you'll hear it called out, MECO. This is where all 9 M1D engines shut off and slow the vehicle down in preparation for the second event, stage separation. As the name suggests, this is where the first stage separates from the second stage, with stage 1 starting to make its way back to Earth for landing on our
Started.
while stage 2 continues its journey with the third event, SES-1, or Second Engine Start 1. This is where MVAC will light up and begin to propel the second stage along with the Starlink and 2 rideshare satellites into orbit. So just a few seconds ago, we heard the call out that MVAC chill has begun. That's the same thing as what I described prior to liftoff for the M1D engines. We flow a little bit of that super chilled liquid oxygen into the turbo pump of the MVAC engine, helping to prepare the prop system for that super cold fluid to flow through. So there we can see that the engine...
Stage separation confirmed.
All right, so on the left-hand side of your screen, we got the first stage, and the second, on the right-hand side, the second stage, and there we heard call out MVAC ignition. We can see that nozzle begin to develop a lovely orange glow as Earth rotates in the background. On the left-hand side, we got first stage deploying the grid fins in preparation for the drone ship landing. In just a few seconds, we're going to have fairing deploy. Love that view of MVAC. And there's our first view inside the payload fairing. There we have visual and call out there that fairing separation has occurred. As a reminder, we will be attempting to recover those fairing halves today with our recovery ship, Sheila Bordelon. And of course, we're going to be recovering the first stage with our drone ship, utilize a view for today's recovery attempt.
Acquisition of signal, Bermuda.
As Stage 2 heads towards its targeted drop-off orbit, Stage 1 will execute 2 burns in order to make its way back to Earth. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin 1D engines will reignite. This helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The second burn is the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. We do this at the last minute to conserve as much fuel as possible. If you're just catching up with us, we had a successful launch of Falcon 9 from Kennedy Space Center's Pad 39A. On the right side of your screen, you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9 Stage 2 as it delivers our Starlink and rideshare payloads to orbit. On the left, Stage 1 is cruising back to our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, in the Atlantic Ocean. Our Starlink satellites are in LEO, or low Earth orbit, at around 550
But
kilometers.
vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Most satellites are around 36,000 kilometers in altitude at GEO or geostationary orbit. When the satellites are further from Earth, the round-trip data time between the user and the satellite, also known as latency, is much higher, resulting in poor performance for activities like video calls and online gaming. About a minute out here from entry burn. On the left-hand see the first stage as it cruises in. Falcon 9 is equipped with 4 hypersonic grid fins positioned near the top of the first stage. The stage uses nothing but the grid fins for steering as it makes its return to Earth. They orient the rocket during re-entry and guide the rocket during descent. Occasionally, you'll also see some white puffs. These are nitrogen gas bursts for attitude adjustment and control. Now we're about 20 seconds out from entry burn. As a reminder, this is a 3-engine burn that is meant to slow the first stage as it hits the thicker parts of the Earth's atmosphere.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn is started. And Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And we just had a confirmation of Stage 1 entry burn cutoff. Now we're about 60 seconds away from landing, and at this point the vehicle is traveling around 900 miles per hour. This really puts the deceleration into perspective. In the span of less than a minute, we will have slowed from twice the speed of a jet all the way down to 0 as the rocket lands. There are a couple of events scheduled to happen in close proximity here. Stage 1 landing burn will begin and will finish its burn in about 25 seconds. And then stage 2 up in space will stop firing about 15 seconds later, at which point we'll enter the first coast period, so prepare for that in about 45 seconds.
Stage 1 is transonic.
Got a great view of both the first stage re-entering into the Atlantic and stage 2 as it continues on a nominal orbit.
Stage 1 landing burn has started.
At a start of stage 1. As a reminder, we may lose coverage of the vehicle as it attempts to land on the drone ship.
Landing legs have deployed.
Landing leg deployed.
Stage 2 FTS.
On the left-hand side of the screen, got a beautiful view of a successful landing. This marks our 84th successful recovery of an orbital-class rocket and the 6th recovery of this particular booster.
Tico.
And there we had second engine cutoff 1, or SECO 1. Waiting for a confirmation of good orbit.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And there the team confirmed good orbit. Now, stage 2 is going to coast in this orbit for the next 45 minutes or so. While that happens, take a look at this animation showcasing where we are in the coast phase. We'll see you back here at T plus 54 minutes for a second stage relight and the deployment of our 2 ride shares on board today.
Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, May 26th, and on screen is a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 2:59 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. My name is Yomezo, a Dragon propulsion engineer, joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You're watching a live webcast for the 13th Starlink launch this year and 29th to date. Starlink is a satellite internet constellation designed and manufactured by SpaceX that can provide high-speed, low-latency internet to people living in remote and rural locations around the globe. If you've been following Starlink's progress, you'll know that our Starlink beta service is now available in the United States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and several locations around Europe. We're excited to announce that service is now also available in Belgium and the Netherlands. To date, over 500,000 people have placed an order or put down a deposit for Starlink, and with every launch, we get closer to connecting more people across the world. As we launch more satellites, install more ground stations, and continue to improve our networking software, our data speed, latency, and uptime will improve dramatically. In addition to being able to provide our customers with better service, with every Starlink launch, we get closer to our goal of near global coverage of the populated world. As always, head over to starlink.com to learn more. We are now at T-minus 11.5 minutes, and all systems are still go for an on-time liftoff at 2:59 p.m. Eastern Time. With that, let's take a closer look at the rocket that you see on your screen.
Hello, I'm Shiva Bharadwaj, a space operations engineer. Now the Falcon 9 on your screen, that's our 2-stage liquid-fueled rocket, has been loading propellants since T-minus 35 minutes. Falcon 9 stands 229 feet tall. That's slightly taller than a 21-story building. And much different from our recent Starlink missions, which launched and landed boosters for an 8th, 9th, and even a record-breaking 10th time. The booster that we're flying today is fairly new, having only supported the Sentinel 6A mission last year. Now, the bottom 2/3 of the vehicle is the first stage. You can see some of the soot left over from its previous flight. The first stage accelerates the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space with the help of 9 Merlin engines that it has at its base. Now, as I mentioned, we will be attempting to recover this first stage for the second time on our drone ship named Just Read the Instructions. On top of the first stage, we have our black carbon fiber inner stage, and on top of that is Falcon 9's second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine. Once the first and second stages separate about 2.5 minutes into the mission, the Merlin vacuum engine will ignite and carry our 60 Starlink satellites into an elliptical orbit around planet Earth. Now, you'll also notice this large nose cone at the top of the rocket. That's called a fairing. That's where the stack of Starlink satellites is safely enclosed. The fairing's job is to protect those satellites from aerothermal heating, aerodynamic loads, and contamination during the ascent phase. Once we reach the vacuum of space, we'll jettison those fairing halves as the second stage continues on its journey to orbit. The fairing halves protecting our Starlink payload have quite a history. This will be the first fifth flight for one of the halves. Before today's launch, that half supported 4 previous Starlink missions going back to 2019. The other fairing half will be flying for the third time, previously having supported the Transporter 1 and Starlink 21 missions. Now, today's flight also marks the 40th time SpaceX has reflown fairing halves since November 2019. And of course, we're going to be attempting to recover them today using our recovery vessels named Go Searcher and Go Navigator. Beautiful day at the Cape. Weather is forecast 90% favorable for liftoff, and the recovery conditions look quite good for the booster. So with that, the vehicle, satellites, weather, and range are all looking good for an on-time liftoff just a few minutes from now. Now, if for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity available tomorrow at 2:38 p.m. Eastern Time.
Now that you know a little about the structure of Falcon 9 and its engines, the propellant, which is a substance used to create the energy to make the rocket go. Falcon 9 is a bipropellant vehicle, meaning it uses 2 propellants, a fuel and an oxidizer. An oxidizer is a type of chemical which a fuel requires to burn. Most burning on Earth uses oxygen, which is prevalent in the atmosphere. However, in space, there's no atmosphere to provide oxygen or other oxidizers, so rockets need to carry them up on their own. For Falcon 9, our fuel is a refined form of kerosene known as RP1, and our oxidizer is a super-chilled liquid oxygen called LOX. The liquid oxygen is chilled well below its boiling point so that it becomes what we call densified, which means there is a much greater amount of mass per volume, and we can load more of it into the booster. In addition to its propellants, Falcon 9 also needs an ignition source in order to go. And for that, we use the chemical TTAB, or triethyl aluminum and triethyl borane. When it is fully fueled, Falcon 9 holds just over 1 million pounds of propellant that the vehicle will burn through in less than 3 minutes after liftoff. Once our Merlin engines begin to burn RP1 kerosene and liquid oxygen, you'll see the rocket throwing the exhaust out of the engine bells in one direction while pushing the rocket in the other. This is a great example of Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That 1 million-pound weight of propellant is turned into all the flames that you see in flight coming out of the engines, creating the almost 2 million pounds of force exerted on the rocket to lift it up.
Now, in order to get to space, the rocket has to do more than just go up. It also has to go sideways really, really fast. At liftoff, gravity is pulling straight down on the rocket. But as we ascend, we'll start to tilt the engines, which is technically referred to as gimbaling. That turns the rocket horizontally. We're still going up, but we're also now heading horizontally away from the launch pad, and that maneuver is referred to as a gravity turn. The rocket typically needs to get to about 7.5 kilometers per second, or about 17,500 miles an hour horizontally, in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and to get into orbit. To help demonstrate the concept, imagine we were firing a cannon from a really high mountain. The cannonball will arc, and then gravity will pull it back down to Earth. As you increase the power, the cannonball will arc and land further and further away. Eventually, you can continue to increase the power, and the cannonball will go so fast that it ends up in free fall around the Earth. Gravity's still pulling on it, but it's going so fast that it never hits the ground. This arc that constantly misses the Earth is what we call an orbit. So, when we get to liftoff today, keep an eye out on the orientation of Falcon 9. You'll see it initially start to go straight up until about T+10 seconds, at which point we'll start to shift orientation so Falcon 9 can start picking up sideways velocity. But before we get to that, why don't we check in on the status of the vehicle for today's launch?
We are currently just under T-minus 5 minutes and 30 seconds from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. We are currently waiting for the transporter erector, or TE, to retract, and that's that truss structure right next to the vehicle. First, the TE truss will open, and the transporter erector will then begin to retract away from the rocket slightly, and at T0, hydraulics will pull the TE farther away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. Now, the TE provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing.
Tanks pressing for Strongback retract.
Now, those clamp arms that you can see just below the fairing should start to open soon, and strong back retraction should happen in just a few seconds here.
Strongback lower started.
You heard strongback has started to retract. You can see this clamp arm opening around the Falcon's second stage there. You can see that strongback TE is started to move away from the vehicle there. Now, the first and second stages are both nearly fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Super chilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer, and that is what you see creating those white clouds that you can see around Falcon 9 there. And that's because the warm, humid ambient air causes the liquid oxygen to turn into a gas around the booster. Now, first stage should finish prop loading at T-minus 3 minutes, just under 10 seconds here. And the second stage will finish prop loading about a minute after that at T-minus 2 minutes.
Poco bleed.
At T-minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9...
Lock slow, closed out.
Falcon 9 will be in startup, and you heard that call out for stage 1 LOX load complete. And when Falcon 9 gets in startup at T-minus 60 seconds, this means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers have taken control of the launch countdown. And just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, we light the Merlin 1D engines using that T-type ignition source we talked about, and we're set to lift off. The Starlink payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is still looking favorable, and the range is green for launch. So here at just over T-minus 2 minutes, let's listen in on the terminal countdown.
Stage 2, lock load, closed out.
We have just finished loading our second stage. Our Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with over 1 million pounds of kerosene, RP1, and liquid oxygen. Again, that white cloud coming from the booster there towards the middle is normal and expected. That is venting from the TE LOX line. Again, at T-minus 1 minute, Falcon 9 will go into startup, and this is when stage 1 and stage 2 will begin pressurizing for launch, and the flight computer will have taken control of the countdown.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup, and in just a few seconds, the launch director should give the final go for launch.
Stage 2, pressing for flight.
Falcon 9, Starlink LDs go for launch.
You heard that call out for go for launch. All systems are go.
T-minus 30 seconds.
Let's listen in to the terminal count and watch as Falcon 9 takes our Starlink satellites to orbit.
T-minus 15 seconds.
Stage 1, present for flight.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. And liftoff.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Stage 1, propulsion is nominal.
What a beautiful day for a rocket launch here. As you can see, Falcon 9 has successfully lifted off from Pad 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, carrying our stack of 60 Starlink satellites to orbit. Moments ago, we throttled the engines down in preparation for max Q, or the maximum aerodynamic pressure that the rocket will see.
Vehicle is supersonic.
Vehicle is supersonic, and we should be passing through max Q here in just a few seconds.
Vehicle has reached maximum aerodynamic pressure.
We just passed through max Q, and in about a minute we will have 3 events happening back to back, and that's main engine cutoff or MECO, stage separation, and second engine start 1. So first, main engine cutoff. That is where all 9 Merlin 1D engines that you can see burning right now will shut off to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation. And this is where the first stage separates from the second stage.
Show has begun.
With the first stage making its way back to land on our drone ship, just read the instructions, while second stage continues on its journey to its third event, which is second engine startup 1. Now this is where the 1 MVAC engine on our second stage lights up and propels that second stage along with our Starlink satellites to orbit. What a beautiful view of those 9 M1D engines burning there on a beautiful clear day. And we're coming up on main engine cutoff shortly here in just about 10 seconds.
MECO.
Stage separation confirmed. You can see in that beautiful footage that we did just have MECO, stage separation, and second engine startup 1. Those grid fins are coming out on the first stage there on the left. And in just a few seconds, we should have our fairing deploy. You heard the call out, and you can see on your video there that we have had successful fairing deploy. And again, today's flight marks the 40th time that SpaceX has reflown a Falcon fairing half since November of 2019. Now, this is also our first 5th reflight for one of our fairing halves and a 3rd for the other half. In order to recover these fairing halves for future flights, we will be attempting to recover them again with the help of our recovery vessels, Go Searcher and Go Navigator.
Stage 2 continuing towards its first orbit on the right-hand side of your screen. Left-hand side of your screen, you can see Falcon 9's first stage reorienting itself for its next 2 activities. That'll be 2 burns to come back safely to Earth. First of those being the entry burn. That's where we'll ignite 3 of the Merlin 1D engines to help slow down the first stage as it re-enters the upper parts of the Earth's atmosphere. The second burn will happen closer to the drone ship. That's the landing burn. That's where we'll ignite just a single center Merlin engine. That'll bring the first stage's velocity rapidly down to 0 for a soft touchdown. On the right-hand side of your screen, second stage continuing to burn nominally, acceleration right down the middle. And you can see the glow of the nozzle there. Now, if you are just catching up with us, we did have
Stage 2 on nominal trajectory.
We did have a successful launch of Falcon 9 from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. And first stage on the left-hand side of your screen is headed back to our drone ship named Just Read the Instructions, stationed out in the Atlantic Ocean. Second stage heading on the right-hand side of your screen is headed to its first orbit. As a reminder, today's mission does mark the second flight for this booster. If you happen to catch fairing separation earlier, this will be the first 5th flight for one of those fairing halves and the 3rd flight for the other half. Reusability is critical to what we do here at SpaceX. It allows us to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, and that drives down the cost. Now you can see the grid fins extended on the left-hand side of your screen. Every so often you'll see puffs of white gas. That's attitude control coming from the first stage to help reorient us to get the 9 Merlins on Falcon 9 pointed towards the Earth. Those Merlin engines are optimized for thrust at sea level. They help Falcon 9 achieve about 190,000 pounds of thrust during ascent and descent. Meanwhile, the Merlin vacuum is optimized for space. That's why it has that larger nozzle. Coming up here is entry burn. Keep an eye out on the left-hand side of your screen.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Stage 1 FTS is safe.
This burn expected to last about 20 seconds.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
Successful shutdown of those 3 Merlin engines. Now, if you've followed along our missions in the past, you'll know that soot
Stage
on
2
the
continues
first stage
on nominal trajectory.
is an indication that the rocket has flown before. And that's because we use rocket-grade kerosene, or RP1, as our fuel in Falcon 9. That's a carbon-based propellant. As we burn it, it generates soot. So with the engines down, as we're coming in through the Earth's atmosphere, the soot from the plume comes back up on the first stage and deposits it along the surface of the vehicle. Now, if we didn't do that entry burn, the first stage would come in very quickly in the atmosphere, and the aerodynamic forces could cause it to rip apart. So that's why we do that entry burn. And we did temporarily lose the video feed, but we'll hopefully... There we go. Beautiful view. Now, at this point, since we're in the Earth's atmosphere, those grid fins will take over orientation and trajectory back towards the drone ship. Coming up, Stage 1 landing burn will begin. Shortly after landing burn ends,
Landing burn startup.
the second stage's engine will shut down. We should be in our expected orbit there. So keep an eye out, see if we can get a video feedback for the first stage.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
Fantastic. Right down the middle. That's our 85th successful recovery. 100th, 18th successful launch of the Falcon 9. Now keep an ear out here for second engine cutoff number 1 on the second stage. And with that, navigation officer, we did hear the call out there for SECO. Navigation officer will be checking
Expected loss of signal.
the parameters. Make sure we are in our intended orbit.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Fantastic news. So from here, we do have a coast phase followed up by the second burn of our second stage engine. These additional burns allow us to modify the orbits of the payload more efficiently than if we were to launch directly into our final orbit. That's just one of those quirks of orbital mechanics. And today, our second stage will coast for 35 minutes until we reach apogee, which is the highest point of the orbit. Views here on your screen of the fairing and then the Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. So once we reach the highest point of the orbit, we will reignite the second stage for a short burn. You can follow along the progress of the second stage with this animation showing where we are around the Earth. We'll be back here at T plus 44 minutes and 30 seconds for second engine start number 2. See you soon.
Good evening. It's Monday, September 18th, and on your screen is a live view of Falcon 9 as it awaits its 8:55 p.m. Pacific time launch from Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base. My name is Yomezo, and I'm a propulsion engineer here at SpaceX, joining you from our headquarters in Hawthorne, California, a little under 200 miles south of our launch pad today. We're excited to be covering our first West Coast Starlink mission and our first launch from Vandenberg this year. The last mission that launched from Space Launch Complex 4E was the Sentinel 6A mission in 2020 and our 32nd to date. As many of you already know, Starlink is a satellite internet constellation designed and manufactured by SpaceX to provide high-speed, low-latency internet to people living in remote and rural locations around the globe. Our beta service is now available in a growing number of places across the globe, including the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Germany, New Zealand, Isle of Man, Jersey, Australia, Austria, France, Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark, Ireland, Switzerland, Portugal, Chile, and Poland. To date, over 500,000 people have placed an order or put down a deposit for Starlink. More than 100,000 user terminals have shipped, and with every launch, we get closer to connecting more people around the world. We are now at T minus 12 minutes and 45 seconds, and all systems are still go for an on-time liftoff at 8:55 p.m. Pacific time. And with that, we'll take a closer look at the rocket that's just peeking through the clouds there on your screen. Falcon 9 has been loading propellants since T minus 35 minutes, and that's our 2-stage liquid-fueled rocket on your screen right now. The Falcon 9 vehicle stands 229 feet tall, or slightly taller than a 21-story building, and this will be the second time that a booster flies for its 10th mission. The bottom 2/3 of the vehicle that you can barely see there is the first stage, and you may be able to just make out the soot markings left over from its previous 9 flights. The first stage is what accelerates the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere into space with the help of 9 Merlin engines at the base of the rocket. We will be attempting to recover the first stage today on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, as you can see on your screen there, and this will be the first time that the Of Course I Still Love You drone ship supports a West Coast mission. On the top of the first stage is the black carbon fiber inner stage, and on top of that is the Falcon 9 second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine. Once the first and second stages separate about 2.5 minutes into the mission, the MVAC engine will ignite and carry the Starlink satellite to a polar orbit around the Earth. You'll also notice the large nose cone at the very top of the rocket, and this is the fairing. That's where the stack of Starlink satellites is currently safely enclosed. The fairing protects the satellites from aerosomal heating, aerodynamic loads, and contamination during ascent. Once we reach the vacuum of space, we'll jettison the fairing as the second stage continues on its journey to orbit. Like our booster, the fairing halves protecting our Starlink payload today are also flight-proven. This will be the third flight of one of the fairing halves and the second flight for the other half. One half supported our TurkSat 5A and GPS 3 missions, and the other half supported our NROL 108 mission last year. Today's flight will be our 24th mission with reflown fairings and the 43rd and 44th refurbished fairing half flown. And we'll be attempting to recover the fairing halves again today using our recovery vessel NRC Quest, which previously supported a Dragon recovery mission. The latest weather forecast shows 100% favorable for liftoff Winds are light, so the evening marine layer that you can see there may linger and affect visibility. But with that, the vehicle, satellites, weather, and range are all looking good for an on-time liftoff just a few minutes from now. If for some reason we do not launch today, we do have a backup opportunity on Tuesday, September 14th at 8:56 p.m. Pacific Time or September 15th at 3:56 UTC. With every Starlink launch, network capacity will increase, allowing Starlink to serve more people in more areas around the globe. Starlink is already delivering high-speed broadband internet to remote areas that previously had limited or no internet access. Recently, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma began a pilot program installing Starlink in rural locations across the reservation. Without reliable internet, residents had limited access to healthcare, telemedicine, and education opportunities. But through this pilot program, Starlink has the opportunity to help connect the Cherokee Nation with the kind of resources that can make a huge difference. Starlink is also being piloted in Sotomo and Calete Sierra, Chile, two remote towns impacted by the digital divide. Sotomo, the first pilot site, is in a forested area in southern Chile, and only 20 families live in the town. The second pilot site is Calete Sierra on the coast, about 1,200 miles north of Sotomo. Using tablets provided by the Education Ministry, the remote school in Sotomo, which currently has about 7 students, can now access online learning material, visit virtual museums, and make video calls. Starlink was designed for remote communities just like Sotomo and Calete Sierra, where high-speed connectivity can have a transformational impact. And the Starlink team is eager to support these pilot programs, starting with local schools. And today's launch of Starlink satellites will bring us another step closer in delivering high-speed broadband internet to those who need it most. The Starlink satellites launching today represent a huge leap forward as the team continues to iterate and improve Starlink technology. Most satellites don't speak to each other directly. Instead, they use radio frequency communications with a ground station to relay communications between satellites. The Starlink satellites launching today will be testing fully operational optical inter-satellite links, otherwise known as space lasers, to provide direct communications between the satellites without a ground station acting as an intermediary. Fewer pings to ground stations means Starlink will be able to both expand and improve service, especially in very remote areas. All future Starlink satellites will feature optical space lasers. As we mentioned at the top of the webcast, today's mission is launching from Space Launch Complex 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base, which is ideally suited for payloads going to a polar orbit. By launching to a polar orbit, these satellites will be able to see almost all the way to the poles, providing near global coverage. This means Starlink will be able to expand service in Alaska, Scandinavia, and other polar regions. And on top of all that, the team continues to iterate and improve production of Starlink hardware. So we're currently developing a next-generation Starlink user terminal that can be manufactured much faster and more efficiently than previous versions. All of these ongoing advancements translate to better internet access for more people in more places than ever before. You heard the call out that the Stage 1 fuel loading has just completed, and in just a few minutes, Falcon 9 will lift off, carrying our upgraded Starlink satellites and their new optical space lasers to a polar orbit. Now, in order to get these satellites into space, the rocket has to do more than just go up. It also has to go sideways, really, really fast. So at liftoff, gravity is pulling straight down on the rocket. As we extend, we actually tilt the engines, also known as gimbaling, and this turns the rocket horizontally. We're still going up, but now we're also headed horizontally away from the launch pad. This is what we call a gravity turn. The rocket typically needs to go 17,500 miles per hour horizontally in order to avoid being pulled back down to Earth and actually get into orbit. To help demonstrate this concept, imagine firing a cannon from a really high mountain. The cannonball will arc and then gravity will pull it down to Earth. As you increase the power, the cannonball will arc and land further and further away. Eventually, if you could continue to increase the power, the cannonball will be going so fast that it ends up in free fall around the Earth. Gravity is still pulling down on the cannonball, but it's going so fast that it never hits the ground. This arc, which constantly misses the Earth, is called an orbit. So when we lift off today, keep an eye on the orientation of Falcon 9. You'll see it go straight up until about T plus 10 seconds, at which point it will begin to shift in orientation so that Falcon 9 can also go sideways really fast. But before we get to that, let's check in on the status of the vehicle for today's launch. We are currently a little over T minus 4 minutes from liftoff, and Falcon 9 is now moving into the final stages of the countdown. We are currently waiting for the transporter erector, or TE, to retract, and that's that truss structure that you can probably barely see right now to the right of the vehicle. First, the TE clamps will open, and then the transporter erector will begin to retract away from the rocket slightly, and at T0, hydraulics pull the TE farther away from Falcon 9 as it lifts off. Now the transporter erector provides liquids, gases, electrical connections to the second stage, as well as air conditioning to the payload fairing.
Stage 1 LOX loads complete.
Stage 1 LOX loading is complete here at T minus 3 minutes, and the second stage is also nearing fully loaded with 1 million pounds of kerosene fuel and liquid oxygen. Super chilled liquid oxygen is our propellant oxidizer, and that is what is creating those white clouds that you see around Falcon 9 along kind of through the mist, and that's because the warm, humid ambient air is causing that liquid oxygen to turn into gas. Now the first stage just finished prop loading at T minus 3 minutes, and the second stage will be finishing up at T minus 2 minutes. At T minus 60 seconds, Falcon 9 will be in startup, and this means that the rocket's autonomous internal flight computers will have taken over the launch countdown. And just inside of T minus 2 seconds, we will light the Merlin 1D engines, and we're set to lift off. The Starlink payload continues to be healthy, and the Falcon 9 team is tracking no issues on the rocket. Weather is still looking favorable, and the range is green for launch. We're at just under T minus 2 minutes. Let's listen into the terminal countdown.
Stage 2 LOX loads complete.
Stage 2 LOX loading is complete. You can see that white cloud that's just puffed up on the right of the booster there is venting from the TE LOX line. This is normal and expected. It joins that beautiful view from Vandenberg with the marine layer and the fog, with Falcon 9 there peeking out in the middle. We're just about 10 seconds away from the Falcon 9's flight computers taking over the countdown.
Flight computers in startup.
Falcon 9 flight computer is in startup. The Stage 1 and Stage 2 tanks are beginning to pressurize for launch.
Go for launch.
The launch director has just given the final go for launch. All systems are go. Let's listen in to the terminal countdown and watch as Falcon 9 takes our 51 Starlink satellites into orbit.
T-minus 30 seconds of counting. T-minus 15. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Liftoff.
What a beautiful view of Falcon 9 as it successfully lifts off from Pad 4E at Vandenberg Space Force Base, carrying our stack of 51 Starlink satellites to orbit. Now, moments ago, we throttled the engines down in preparation for max Q, or maximum aerodynamic pressure on the engines, and that is coming up in just about 10 seconds here.
Max Q.
We did just pass through max Q, and in a minute we will have 3 events happening in back-to-back in rapid succession. And that's main engine cutoff, or MECO, stage separation, and second engine startup 1. Now, first main engine cutoff, or MECO, this is where all 9 M1D engines will shut off to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation, where
engine chill started.
Where the first and second stage will separate, with the first stage making its way back down to Earth for landing, and the second stage continuing on its journey to the third event, or second engine startup 1. And this is where the MVAC engine lights up and propels the second stage along with the Starlink satellites to orbit. We're about 30 seconds from main engine cutoff, and you can see that beautiful plume of the rocket as it is soaring in the sky.
MECO.
You can see the light from the engine. The light from that first stage engine cutoff.
MVAC ignition confirmed.
From main engine cutoff, you saw the successful stage separation, and the second stage engine has started up from those live views on your right there. That is
separation confirmed.
Merlin vacuum engine, and here we are waiting for fairing separation. You can see that great view of the 2 fairing halves separating from the Starlink satellites. Today's flight marks the 24th time SpaceX has reflown the Falcon fairing halves since November of 2019. And again, this was our second flight for one of the fairing halves and a third for the other half. We'll be attempting to recover the halves again today using our recovery vessel, NRC Quest, which previously supported Dragon recovery missions. You can see stage 2 here with the MVAC engine lit up and carrying our Starlink payload to orbit. And with the stage 2 headed towards its targeted drop-off orbit, stage 1 will be executing 2 burns in order to make its way back down to Earth. The first is the entry burn, where 3 of the M1D engines will reignite, and this helps to slow the stage down as it re-enters the upper part of the Earth's atmosphere. The second burn is the landing burn, and this is a single engine burn that brings the vehicle speed down rapidly in order to land on the drone ship. If you're just catching up with us, had a successful launch of Falcon 9 from Vandenberg Space Force Base, Slick 4E, and you're looking at a live view of Falcon 9's second stage as it delivers our Starlink payload to orbit.
Both vehicles are following nominal trajectories.
Both stage 1 and stage 2 are on nominal trajectories right now, with stage 1 is cruising back to our drone ship. Of course, I still love you in the Pacific Ocean, sorry. As a reminder, today's mission marks the 10th flight for this particular booster, the second flight for one fairing half, and the third flight for the other half. Reusability is critical to what we do at SpaceX. It allows us to refly the most expensive parts of the rocket, which in turn drives down the cost of space access. Now the stage 1 entry burn should be coming up here in a little under a minute, and this will be a 20-second burn of that first stage. Some of you may know that Falcon 9 is named after the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars, and the number 9 indicates the number of Merlin 1D engines on the first stage. The Merlins on the first stage are optimized for sea level, and these achieve 190,000 pounds of thrust during ascent and descent, and the MVAC engine, or Merlin vacuum engine that you see on your screen right now, is optimized for 220,500 pounds of thrust in vacuum.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
What a cool view on your left of the stage 1 entry burn startup there. This is a 20-second burn of 3 of the Merlin 1D engines of the first stage.
Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
We did have.
Yes, it's safe.
We did have a successful stage 1 entry burn, and you can see those super cool live views from the stage 1 there as it is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We can't quite make it out from those stage 1 views, but there is a lot of soot on that first stage of the booster, and that is because the rocket-grade kerosene, or RP1, that is used as a fuel in Falcon 9 is carbon-based, and when it burns, it generates that
Stage 1
soot.
transonic.
And then as the booster approaches its landing site during descent, it does this long re-entry burn, which we just saw, that slows it down prior to re-entering the atmosphere. And when it re-enters with its engines first, the booster actually flies through its own plume, which deposits the soot on the rocket. Now, stage 1 landing burn should be starting here very shortly.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 FTS is safe.
Stage 1 landing burn has just started. That is our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, in the Pacific Ocean. As you can see from that beautiful
Stage
view
1 landing confirmed.
of stage 1, having landed on our drone ship for the 10th time, this marks our 90th overall successful recovery of a Falcon 9 first stage and the 124th successful launch of a Falcon 9. We just missed it, but we did have a successful second engine cutoff 1 and a confirmation of a good orbit. Up next, we will have a coast phase followed by the second burn of our second stage engine. These additional burns allows us to modify the orbits of our payloads more efficiently than launching directly into the final orbit. So today, our second stage will coast for about 35 minutes until we reach apogee, or the highest point of the orbit, where we will conduct that second stage burn. You can follow the progress of the second stage with this animation showing where we are around the Earth
and we'll see you back here at T plus 44 minutes, 30 seconds for our second engine start too.
Good evening. It is May 23rd here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. You are currently looking at a live view of the Falcon 9 as it awaits its 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time launch from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. My name is Tom Perderio, and I'm a software engineer here at SpaceX. Today's launch is a particularly exciting one as it's our first launch of a new production design satellite for our Starlink broadband network. Back in 2015, SpaceX announced that we'd be tackling a new challenge, delivering cost-effective broadband internet to consumers around the globe. We've got a long way to go before we get to that point, but if successful, we'll be able to deliver high-quality broadband internet to people all over the world, including those who have never had service before. Last year, we launched a couple of test satellites, Tintin-A and Tintin-B, and since then, we've made significant improvements in the design and capability of our satellites. Today, we'll be launching 60 brand new Starlink satellites, and our primary goal is to push the operational capabilities of these satellites to the limit and learn as much as possible. We fully expect to run into problems along the way, but what we learned here is key to developing an affordable and reliable broadband service in the future. There's lots of exciting stuff to talk about with the Starlink satellites, but first, let's take a look at the Falcon 9 out on the pad. You're currently looking at a live view of that Falcon 9. That's our 70-meter, two-stage liquid-fueled launch vehicle. The bottom two-thirds of the vehicle is the first stage, which accelerates the vehicle through the Earth's atmosphere to the edge of space with the help of its 9 Merlin engines at the bottom. Today, we will be attempting to recover the first stage for the third time on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You, which is currently stationed about 325 nautical miles northeast of Cape Canaveral and 100 nautical miles off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. This booster flew for the first time back in September for the Telstar 18B mission, and most recently in January of this year for the Iridium 8 mission. Above that first stage, the second stage, which has a single Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC engine, this ignites after the first stage separates. The second stage is what will carry the Starlink satellites to an altitude of 440 kilometers above the Earth's surface. From there, they will use their onboard propulsion systems to move up to their operational altitude of 550 kilometers. It's also worth noting that these satellites are going to a low Earth orbit, which means they do not stay in one place like a geosynchronous orbit, but rather they move in relation to the Earth. Inside the fairing, you can see on your screen right there, is a stack of 60 satellites safely enclosed in its 17-foot diameter. This is the pointed nose cone on the very top of the rocket, that fairing. The fairing protects the payload from aerothermal loads, heating, and contamination during ascent. Once we reach the vacuum of space, we'll be jettisoning the fairing as the second stage continues on its journey to orbit. Today, we will be attempting to recover the fairing pieces with our recovery ships, Go Searcher and Go Navigator. The Falcon 9 rolled out to the pad with the payload last night and went vertical this morning. The chief launch engineer held a technical poll at T-minus 1 hour, and the launch director held a propellant load and launch go-no-go poll at T-minus 38 minutes. Falcon 9 has begun loading propellants and has been doing that since T-minus 35 minutes. Currently, the rocket-grade kerosene, or RP-1, is nearly fully loaded on the first stage, and the second stage is fully fueled. Liquid oxygen, or LOX loading, is currently underway on both stages. At T-minus 7 minutes, the engine chill will begin. This is where we allow a small amount of that super cold liquid oxygen to flow into the Merlin engine's turbopumps prior to the full flow of LOX into the vehicle to avoid any thermal shocks to the system. Finally, the transporter erector, which is that white tower you can see on the side of the rocket, will retract away from the rocket slightly, just around T-minus 4.5 minutes. This provides clearance for the Falcon 9 to lift off. As for the spacecraft inside that fairing, at T-minus 15 minutes, the Starlink spacecraft finished transitioning to internal power. The vehicle remains healthy and is currently tracking no issues for tonight's launch. The weather's also looking great. No issues with ground level or upper level winds today. No clouds or lightning rules to violate. The weather is looking fantastic for tonight's launch, and the range also go and is prepared to support today's mission. We can continue to count down to liftoff in just about 9 minutes. If for some reason we do have to call a hold on today's launch, we will have a backup opportunity for tomorrow, May 24th at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Today, most satellite internet service comes from geostationary satellites, or geosatellites. These are satellites that sit at one point very high above the Earth and provide connectivity over a broad area. The main drawback of this setup is that you have a higher latency or delay in the signal provided because they're so far above the Earth. Satellites like this are also generally more expensive to produce at launch. Low Earth orbit satellites are much closer to the Earth and so have much lower latency or delay in their signal. The satellites are also smaller and less expensive to launch. Here you can see an animation that represents how the Starlink constellation operates. Again, you have a high number of satellites in constant motion covering all parts of the globe. And since they're so low to the Earth, that latency or the delay from the signal going from the ground to the satellite and back down to the ground is much lower than a geostationary satellite. We've learned a lot over the past year and have had a lot of fun testing out the capabilities of those two test satellites. We successfully communicated with ground stations to run 4K video and even play video games over the link. And we also partnered with the Air Force Global Lightning program to demonstrate how over 600 megabits per second of throughput to an aircraft in flight, which is super exciting for those of you who travel frequently. The bulk of our team working this project is based in Redmond, Washington, and watching today's exciting launch, as you can see on your screen right there, they're just as excited as we are in Hawthorne to see this rocket take off tonight. As I mentioned earlier in the webcast, this is our first launch of a production-designed satellite system as part of our effort to launch a next-generation broadband internet satellite constellation. This will be, fun fact, this will actually be the heaviest payload ever flown on a Falcon 9 rocket, weighing roughly 30,000 pounds. Each of those individual 60 satellites weighs about 227 kilograms or 500 pounds each. So while they're smaller than a typical communications satellite, they're still pretty sizable when you stack them all together. And that flat panel design maximizes space, allowing for a very dense launch stack, as you can see right on your screen right now, to take full advantage of that Falcon 9's launch capabilities. Starlink is also the very first Krypton-propelled spacecraft ever flown. Aside from being the native planet of Superman, Krypton also happens to be a nice blend of cost-effective and efficient propellant for ion propulsion. These ion thrusters enable the satellites to orbit raise, maneuver in space, and deorbit at the end of their useful life. The satellites also have a singular on-orbit solar array. This is one larger panel instead of two, which minimizes potential points of failure. Solar cells are standardized and easy to integrate into the manufacturing process. The Starlink satellites are also equipped with an autonomous collision avoidance system. To our knowledge, this is the first of any satellite constellation ever. The satellites use inputs from the Department of Defense's debris tracking system to autonomously perform maneuvers to avoid collisions of space debris and other spacecraft. This capability reduces human error, which allows for a more reliable approach to collision avoidance. In addition, 95% of all the components on the satellites are demisable, which means that when these satellites are at the end of their life, they will be naturally slowed by the Earth's atmosphere and ultimately be vaporized into dust as they re-enter. At 95% demisable, the satellites exceed current safety standards, and future iterative designs will go even further, shifting to a full 100% demisable material design. Also, while flying at a lower altitude of 550 kilometers, we ensure that the satellites will quickly and easily demise at the end of their life cycle. Once they reach the end of their life, the satellites will utilize their onboard ion propulsion system to deorbit over the course of a few months. In the unlikely event that a propulsion system becomes inoperable, the satellites will naturally passively decay because of atmospheric drag